Nicodemus here. So I want it to be simple. Like, what is the easiest way for us to practice miracles?
It's funny, even to answer that question in A Course in Miracles world, given that there's different camps that can't even agree on what a miracle is, which I say that in jest and really with humor, because of course the ego would get around. I mean, I remember going to India where people would sit around the teacher and they talk about peace, love, oneness, consciousness, and then people would argue about the teachings after, and what is a miracle? Some of the original schools of thought and teachers, different teachers of the course in the beginning were a miracle is a shift in perception from fear into love. And then the Circle of Atonement came around and they got Helen's original notes and wrote these cameos that you heard me and a lot of people have heard me talk about. Although a lot of course students really aren't familiar with these cameos. And I thought that they were it was very interesting for me because I had known about them for almost 7 years and I hadn't read them. And I had my own resistance, I think, to reading them, just not really realizing it because, this was like the new school of Course in Miracles. And, they were in some ways critiquing Ken Wapnick, who, when I learned the course, my teacher learned it from Ken Wapnick. And it was very interesting. So I think for many years I was resistant to even reading Helen's original notes. I had picked it up, the Your text, when it had come out, maybe years later. But I remember reading it and going, oof, it had some stuff in there that I just at the time wasn't really ready, to read, and just where I was at in my life. And it was choppy too, the Your text. Well, at Circle of Atonement, they compiled all these notes, so it gives a very different picture of Jesus's instruction to Helen than the Foundation for Inner Peace version. And actually some people are like, wow, it brings almost more of this personal relationship because you see the way Jesus was with Helen and leading her very specifically, like really specifically, the miracle with this person and in this scenario of your life. In the Foundation for Inner Peace's version of A Course in Miracles, which is the one I use in the classes, I love it all. And if you understand the course, it all fits in. It's not, for me, that I was very fortunate to not have to debate people a lot in Course in Miracles. I mean, sometimes years people would come around and try to, whatever it is, it's just natural in any modality that the ego comes up and for me, it gives a different perspective or maybe a deeper perspective about what does it take. What does it to work miracles look like every day? And one of the things Jesus says is it really, to keep it simple, and I think we talked about this on a previous podcast, is watching your thoughts, asking for guidance, and demonstrating miracles. Those three things, that's pretty much the practice if you want to really, the practice. So watching the thoughts, asking for guidance, and demonstrating miracles. So what does the demonstrating of the miracles look like? Well, there's a line in the course where Jesus says in the Foundation for the original version, he says, ask me which miracles to perform. And I always found it was very peculiar of like an instruction. And, he wanted us to be led very specifically in miracles and ask me which miracles to perform, to not us to just do them indiscriminately. And in these cameos, he uses... there's a cameo about Edgar Cayce. Now, a lot of people don't necessarily know who Edgar Cayce is, but I did. I knew of Edgar Cayce even before I studied the course. Because Edgar Cayce did a lot of like psychic work and like dream, the unconscious. He worked and he was a psychic himself, and like premonitions and remote healing and I mean very prominent in like the early 1900s. And in this cameo, they say, he was making like $1,500 a day. People booking him just to sit with him. That's how powerful he was at like healing and psychic. And Jesus talked to Helen about him, which was a profound cameo because Helen was friends with Edgar Cayce's son. So when they first started, because Helen was having psychic dreams that were happening. So Helen went to Hewlin Cayce, which was Edgar Cayce's son, with Bill Thetford. And Actually, he got the first version of the course, one of the first versions to read. And they were talking to him about this premonition. They became friends with him. Well, what Jesus said about Edgar Cayce was, in some ways, in my own language, like he got burnt out because he was just practicing miracles indiscriminately and didn't really ultimately accept the atonement for himself deep down, which is really all of us. And those that are like healers or teachers, or, you talk about, I remember the first time I read that, I found it very interesting. And there's definitely been stuff in the course that, having read it, there's certain lines that would stick out to me where it was almost like I didn't fully understand the line yet. But over many years of knowing exactly which lines they are too, it's almost like the line becomes alive over 10, 12, 15 years of thinking about it and studying the course and reading it cover to cover with students and talking about it, remember that, and then going, maybe if it was like this. And then these cameos came around and it totally deepened like all of it. Was like, wow, because in these cameos, he was talking very directly to her and you could tell it was still his voice, but it was almost very personal in some ways. He'd be like, you should have me on the board of your, I should sit on the board of your, like what you're doing. He's like, I'm really on the board anyway. Like he would almost talk in humor in some ways too. And it didn't really make it in the original course because a lot of the stuff was personal to Helen. And Helen admittedly was like, I just didn't want to get my own stuff in the way. So it makes sense that a lot of the personal stuff she probably took out, but some of that personal stuff is very valuable for people who truly want to learn and study it, because he talks about it like you're going to be led very specifically. And the way I feel like it's been for me is all you have to do is watch your thoughts and scan your mind with the Holy Spirit. Because if you go like, okay, what are pockets of fear, guilt, like unresolved stuff? Literally, you already know what it is anyway, but even if it took 5 minutes to think about it, it's like you're going to get images, you're going to get people, you're going to get that situation. Anything that makes you feel like, is suitable. And that's why the lessons are actually the best way to demonstrate miracles is literally to do Course in Miracles lessons. Because in the lessons, it trains you to actually practice miracles. So there might be a lesson, like one of the lessons. And for those that don't know this about Course in Miracles, is that it's really 3 books in one. I almost want to even call it, because there's supplements, the psychotherapy and the Song of Prayer, which are some of my favorite stuff. Like the psychotherapy section that Helen channeled later is some of the best. It's phenomenal. And it's interesting with my students currently in the advanced class, I read the cameos and then I read the psychotherapy so you can get it. It like comes together because you can put yourself in Helen's shoes, because her life was anything but like peaceful. That's the thing. That's why it's so great. Like she was like a typical angry New Yorker. And to anyone that grew up around New York City, like I grew up outside of New York, but I know the type, just an angry, intellectual New Yorker. I mean, there's without kids, at the heart of it, Columbia University and the crazy madness of New York City. I mean, in the 60s and 70s, like what would that person be like, So it's not like, so she was being led very specifically how Jesus would talk to her. So it's almost like develop. And if Jesus is like, let's say someone doesn't resonate with Jesus, it looks like tuning in. I think course lessons are great because the course would be like, scan your mind for who do you not like. You already know the person right now. Boom. Who pops in? Perfect, suitable for this lesson. You know what I mean? So you just start practicing that. I find it's not so much personal. Like I don't really have people in my life. Like I couldn't tell you the last time I got in an argument or conflict with someone or dramas. Like I don't have that in my life. I do. My forgiveness lessons might be on, on a larger scale. Like, when I see just the awakening of consciousness where we're still asleep and like forgiving the dream, any areas of like unforgiveness within ourselves, any compulsions, addictions that where the result is pain and suffering, all that needs forgiveness. So the demonstrating of miracles you're going to be led very specifically on like what to do. So Jesus says, listen to my words, you know, like, and then act on the correction and the guidance that you're given. Act on it, and you won't even really have to try to so hard. It's almost like the people, the situations are brought to you. Like the way I experience is literally almost like a reel that Holy Spirit's bringing. It's like, oh, this is what's coming now. Okay, got it. Any areas, any pockets of pain or suffering or unforgiveness, that forgiveness is needed. Okay, got it. Sickness, the body, you know, any illness of people you see, like fear of death. You know, it could be money, monetarily, fear of the future, like all that stuff all needs forgiveness. Now, how will you be led to demonstrate it out in the world, in relationship and all of that? I don't know, and I can't really answer that because it's going to be very unique for you. The better you get and the better we learn at listening, or really the better we get at learning to listen, the more and more it's like, oh, this is what I'm doing now. Oh, okay, got it. This is what I'm doing now. Oh, okay, you want me to do this now? Oh, gosh, okay, I guess we're doing this now. Like you're just basically almost even showing up, so you don't even really have to do anything. That's why it comes down to I need to do nothing, and yet we're going to do stuff and be led very specifically on what to do and then what not to do. And that's what I feel like. He's like, ask me which miracles to perform.